The weirdest part about that road trip wasn't the fact that Arman had been acting strange for almost 300 miles. It wasn't the hotel either. It wasn't even what he eventually confessed to me. It was the fact that, looking back, I realized he'd been trying to tell me something the entire time, and I had been too scared to understand it. Arman had been my best friend for almost 8 years. We met in college when we were both 19, back when neither of us had much idea what we were doing with our lives. Somehow, despite being almost complete opposites, we clicked immediately. He was outgoing. I was quieter. He could walk into a room full of strangers and somehow leave with 5 new friends. I was the guy who'd rather sit in the corner and pretend to be busy on my phone. Arman was also the kind of guy everyone assumed was straight without even asking. He dated women. He talked about women. He had a ridiculous number of stories involving women. And I never questioned it. At least, that's what I told myself. The truth was that I'd had a small, embarrassing crush on him for years. I never planned to tell him. Some things were better left alone. Our friendship mattered more than whatever fantasy I had built in my head. So when Arman called me on a Friday afternoon and said, "Pack a bag, we're going on a road trip," I honestly thought he was joking. A road trip where? Doesn't matter. That's not how road trips work. You're overthinking it. I always overthink. I know. I could hear him laughing through the phone. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at an unfinished email on my laptop. Outside, the sky was gray and miserable, and I'd been having one of those weeks where everything felt repetitive. Work, apartment, sleep, repeat. So when he said, "Just trust me, Orlando. 2 nights, I'll drive," I surprised myself by saying yes. "Where are we going?" "You'll find out tomorrow." Arman. 7 a.m. "You're annoying." "Love you too. Be ready." Then he hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. "Love you too." He'd said things like that before. Best friends say things like that. It shouldn't have meant anything. Still, I couldn't shake the strange feeling in my stomach. The next morning, Arman showed up outside my apartment exactly 7 minutes late. He rolled down the passenger window and grinned. "You look terrible." "Good morning to you too." "Get in." I threw my bag into the back seat. He had already loaded the car with snacks, bottled water, coffee, a couple of blankets, and enough junk food to survive a week. "You planned this." "Obviously. You told me yesterday." "I planned it before yesterday." I stared at him. He laughed. "Stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're trying to figure me out." Maybe I was. I climbed into the passenger seat. For the first couple of hours, everything felt normal. We talked about stupid things. We argued about music. He made fun of my driving, even though he wasn't driving. At one point, we stopped at a gas station and bought the worst breakfast sandwiches we'd ever eaten. It was exactly the kind of trip we'd taken a dozen times before. Except there was something different about Arman. I couldn't put my finger on it. He seemed distracted. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me. Not the normal quick glance you'd expect from someone checking whether you were awake. He would look for a second too long. Then, when I noticed, he'd turn his attention back to the road. Around noon, I finally asked, "Okay, what's going on?" He kept his eyes forward. "Nothing." "You're acting weird." "I'm always weird." "More than usual." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just tired." "You've had 3 coffees." "Exactly." I laughed, but he didn't. That was when I realized something was actually bothering him. I lowered the volume on the radio. "Arman." "What?" "If something's wrong, you can tell me." He was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "I know." There was something about the way he said it that made my chest tighten. We drove another hour before he finally told me where we were going. There was a small mountain town about 4 hours from the city, surrounded by forests and hiking trails. Arman had apparently found an old scenic route online and decided we needed to see it. He'd booked a hotel there for one night. You booked a hotel? Yeah. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have said no. That's not true. He glanced at me. Orlando. Okay, maybe. He laughed. By late afternoon, the city was completely behind us. The road became narrower, surrounded by trees on both sides. The sun was dropping, turning everything outside the windshield orange. For the first time all day, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just quiet. I looked out the window. Then Arman suddenly said, "Can I ask you something?" Sure. If I told you something that could change our friendship, would you want to know? My stomach dropped. I turned toward him. What kind of something? I don't know. You don't know? He shook his head. That's the problem. I studied his face. He looked genuinely nervous. I'd known Arman for years. I'd seen him angry, excited, drunk, heartbroken, embarrassed, and terrified of spiders. But I couldn't remember ever seeing him this uncertain. Are you okay? Yeah. You sure? No. That answer made me laugh nervously. He smiled, but it disappeared almost immediately. Forget it. No. He looked at me. I want to know now. Not yet. Then why bring it up? He sighed. Because I need to tell you eventually. The words stayed with me for the rest of the drive. Eventually. Tell me what? I started going through every possibility. Was he moving away? Was he getting married? Had he gotten into some kind of trouble? Was he sick? The more I thought about it, the worse my imagination became. By the time we reached the hotel, I had practically convinced myself that something terrible was about to happen. The hotel itself was small and old-fashioned, the kind of place people probably booked because they wanted to escape the city. There were only a handful of cars in the parking lot. Arman parked near the entrance. Come on, he said. I grabbed my bag. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish. The woman at the front desk smiled as Arman gave her his name. Then she handed him a key card. Room 214. I looked at him. One room? He froze for half a second. Yeah. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't tell me that. I thought you knew. I absolutely did not know. He rubbed the back of his neck. I figured we'd share. There was nothing inherently strange about it. We'd crashed on couches before. We'd shared hotel rooms during college trips. It shouldn't have made my heart beat faster, but it did. We took the elevator upstairs. Neither of us said much. When we reached the room, Arman opened the door. There were 2 beds. I immediately felt ridiculous for being nervous. See? He said. 2 beds. Good. He smiled. Disappointed? I looked at him. He was watching me carefully. No. Right. He walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains. Outside, the mountains were dark silhouettes against the fading evening sky. I dropped my bag beside one of the beds. So? I said, trying to sound casual. When are you finally going to tell me what this is about? Arman didn't answer. He kept looking outside. Then he quietly said something that made my entire body go still. I brought you here because I couldn't tell you at home. I stared at him. Tell me what? He turned around. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he took a slow breath. Orlando, there's something I've been hiding from you. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just a road trip. Not even close. For a few seconds, I honestly didn't know what to say. Arman was standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, staring at me like he was waiting for a verdict. I tried to smile. Okay. He frowned slightly. Okay? Yeah, you said there's something you've been hiding, so tell me. He looked down. It's not that simple. Then make it simple. He gave a nervous laugh. You're making this harder. You're the one who drove me 4 hours into the mountains and told me you have a secret. Fair. He sat on the edge of his bed. I stayed standing. Something about the situation made it impossible for me to relax. What is it? I asked again. He rubbed his palms together. I've been trying to tell you for months. That caught me off guard. Months? Yeah. About what? He looked up at me. Then he looked away. I don't know how you're going to react. I felt my stomach tighten. Arman, you're starting to scare me. That's not what I want. Then tell me. He stood up and walked toward the small table between the beds. He picked up one of the bottles of water we'd brought in and twisted the cap without drinking it. Finally, he said, Do you remember when you asked me last year why I stopped dating? I nodded. Yeah. You thought I was heartbroken. I remember. I wasn't. I waited. He stared at the bottle. I just didn't want to date anyone. Okay. Because every time I tried, I kept thinking about somebody else. My heart gave a strange, heavy beat. I didn't say anything. He continued. I thought it would go away. I swallowed. Did it? He shook his head. No. The room suddenly felt much quieter. I could hear the air conditioner humming above us. I tried to keep my voice steady. Who is it? He looked at me. For 1 second, I thought he was going to say a woman's name. Maybe someone from work. Maybe an old girlfriend. Instead, he said, You. Everything inside me seemed to stop. I stared at him. He didn't look away. I honestly couldn't tell if I'd heard him correctly. What? You. My mouth went dry. Arman? I've tried not to feel this way. He laughed nervously. Believe me, I've tried. I sat down on the edge of my bed because my legs suddenly felt unreliable. He remained standing. I don't understand. I know. You've always been straight? He finished the sentence for me. I nodded. He sighed. I thought I was. That answer somehow hit harder than anything else. I stared at the floor. He continued quietly. I spent years telling myself that whatever I felt around you was just friendship, that I was being protective, that I was just comfortable with you. He paused. But eventually I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I looked up. When did you realize? He smiled faintly. I don't know exactly. Try. He thought about it. Maybe the night you got sick after that party. I remembered. I'd had too much to drink, and Arman had stayed with me until I felt better. You stayed up all night. Yeah. You kept checking if I was breathing. He laughed. You were being dramatic. I was drunk. You were very drunk. I smiled despite myself. Then his expression became serious again. I remember sitting there beside you, watching you sleep, and realizing I didn't want to be anywhere else. My chest tightened. That's when I started getting scared. Scared of me. No. He shook his head. Scared of what I felt. Neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my head since he said my name. Why didn't you tell me? His eyes dropped. Because I didn't want to lose you. That hurt in a completely different way. You thought I'd leave? I didn't know. You know me. I know. You should have known I'd at least listen. I was terrified you wouldn't. He sat down across from me. For the first time since we'd arrived, he looked less like the confident Arman I knew, and more like the guy I'd met years ago, the one who had no idea what he was doing. I've spent months trying to figure out what to do. he said. And? And I finally decided that keeping it from you was worse. I looked at him. So that's why we're here? He nodded. I needed to tell you somewhere I could actually say it. You couldn't tell me at home? I would have backed out. Probably. He smiled. Definitely. I laughed quietly. Then the silence returned. But this time it felt different. There was something hanging between us, something we'd both been avoiding for years. I took a breath. Can I tell you something? His expression changed immediately. Yeah. I've liked you for a long time. He went completely still. I almost laughed from sheer nerves. Not just as a friend. His eyes widened. Orlando. I know. No, you don't. I think I do. He shook his head. You don't understand how long I've wanted to hear that. I looked at him. How long? He smiled. Long enough that it's embarrassing. For the first time all day, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. We both laughed. It was awkward. It was nervous. But it was also the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Then Arman stood. He took one step toward me, stopped, and looked at me as if he was asking a question without saying it. I didn't move away. Neither did he. But instead of doing anything impulsive, he sat beside me. Our shoulders touched. Neither of us pulled away. I was so sure you'd hate me, he whispered. I don't hate you. I know that now. We sat there for a while, just talking. About how long he'd been confused. About the little moments I'd noticed. About all the times we'd almost said something and backed away. It turned out we'd both been hiding the same thing. And somehow, that realization made everything feel less terrifying. Eventually, Arman looked at the clock. It's almost midnight. Yeah. We should probably sleep. Probably. Neither of us moved. Then he laughed. This is awkward. Very. I can sleep on the floor. No. You sure? Yeah. He looked at me. I smiled. Stay. He nodded. Okay. We finally stood up. I got into my bed. Arman got into his. The lights went off. For a few minutes, the room was completely dark. I stared at the ceiling. My heart was still beating too fast. Then I heard his voice. Orlando? Yeah? Are you awake? I smiled in the darkness. Yeah. There was a pause. Good. I waited. There's something else I haven't told you? My smile disappeared. What? He was quiet for so long that I wondered if he'd changed his mind. Then he said softly, The reason I picked this hotel isn't just because it's quiet. I turned toward him. What do you mean? His voice came from the darkness. I've stayed here before. With who? Another pause. Alone. Why? I came here the first time I realized I was in love with you. I couldn't breathe for a second. And before I could ask what he meant, I heard him say the one thing that made me realize the road trip was far from over. I came here because I wanted to decide whether I was finally going to tell you or let you go. I didn't answer him right away. I was lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what he'd just said. I came here because I wanted to decide whether I was finally going to tell you or let you go. The words kept replaying in my head. What does let me go mean? I finally asked. Arman was quiet. It means I was going to stop hoping. Why? Because hoping was getting painful. I turned onto my side. Even in the darkness, I could make out his silhouette across the room. You really thought about giving up on me? Yeah. Why didn't you? He took a slow breath. Because then you called me 3 weeks ago. I frowned. What about it? You called because you were having a terrible day. I remembered. I'd gotten into an argument with my boss and had gone home furious. I'd called Arman without thinking. We'd talked for almost 2 hours. I remember. You fell asleep while we were on the phone. I smiled. Yeah. You don't remember what you said? What did I say? He laughed softly. You said, I'm glad you're my person. My smile disappeared. Oh. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. That was the night I realized I couldn't walk away. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only honest thing that came to mind. I'm glad you're my person too. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt almost peaceful. Then I heard the mattress shift. Arman sat up. Orlando? Yeah? Can I ask you something? Sure. If I'd never said anything, would you ever have told me? I thought about it. Probably not. Why? Because I was scared. Of me? No. I smiled into the darkness. Of losing you. He didn't answer immediately. Then I heard him laugh quietly. That's almost exactly what I was afraid of. We both laughed. It was strange. For years, we'd been terrified of the same thing without realizing it. Eventually, I fell asleep. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was coming through the curtains. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered. The road trip, the hotel, Arman, the confession. I sat up. His bed was empty. My heart sank for a second. Then I heard the bathroom door open. Arman walked out carrying 2 coffees. Morning. Morning. He handed me one. Peace offering. For what? Making your life complicated. I smiled. You definitely succeeded. He sat on the edge of his bed. So, how are you feeling? I took a sip. Honestly? Yeah. Like I woke up in somebody else's life. He laughed. Same. For a few minutes, we drank our coffee in silence. Then he looked at me. So what happens now? I looked back. I don't know. He nodded. Fair. But he waited. I don't want to pretend last night didn't happen. His expression softened. Me neither. We spent most of the morning exploring the town. It was almost funny how normal everything felt. We ate breakfast at a little diner. We argued over which hiking trail to take. He made fun of me for getting lost, despite having the map. I threw a napkin at him. For anyone watching, we probably looked exactly like we always had, but everything underneath the surface had changed. At lunch, we sat outside at a small cafe. Arman was unusually quiet. What? He looked up. What? You're thinking? I'm always thinking. Not like that. He smiled. You're getting good at reading me. I've had practice. He looked down at his coffee. Then he said, There's one thing I'm still worried about. What? Going home. I understood immediately. You think it'll be different? Won't it? I thought about it. Probably. He looked disappointed. That's not necessarily bad. I know. I reached across the table and tapped his hand. He looked at it, then at me. I don't want you to be afraid of me changing our friendship, I said. I'm not afraid of that. Then what? I'm afraid you'll realize you don't actually want this. His voice was quieter now. I squeezed his hand. I wouldn't have told you how I felt if I didn't mean it. He nodded. I know. But I could tell he still wasn't completely convinced. That evening, we drove back toward the hotel as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Neither of us talked much. When we got back, Arman parked and turned off the engine. We should talk. About? Us. I nodded. We went upstairs. The room looked exactly the same as we'd left it. 2 beds, 2 bags, 2 people who suddenly didn't know what the rules were anymore. Arman sat down. I sat beside him. He looked nervous. So, we're really doing this? I smiled. I don't know what this is yet. Fair. But I want to find out. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. Me too. There was a pause. Neither of us moved. Then he said, "Can I tell you something stupid?" Always. I've imagined this conversation about 1,000 times. Really? Yeah. What did you imagine? Honestly? Yeah. I imagined you laughing. I frowned. Why? Because I thought you'd think it was ridiculous. I shook my head. I never would have laughed. I know that now. He looked down. And I imagined you walking out. I felt something twist in my chest. I wouldn't. He looked up. Promise? I can't promise everything will be easy. He nodded. But I can promise I'm not walking out, because you told me the truth. His shoulders relaxed. That's enough. We sat there quietly. Then, almost at the same time, we both laughed. The tension finally broke. Arman leaned back. God, we've been idiots. Massive idiots. 8 years. 8 years. He shook his head. Unbelievable. I smiled. Better late than never. He looked at me. Yeah. Then his expression changed. Not nervous this time. Certain. I want to do this properly. I raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means I don't want this to be some weird hotel confession we pretend never happened when we get home. I nodded. Okay. I want to take you on an actual date. I laughed. You're asking me out? Yes. Right now? Right now. I pretended to think about it. Where? He smiled. I don't know. Romantic. Shut up. I laughed. Then I looked at him. Okay. Okay? Yeah. His smile was immediate. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. He nodded. Then he looked toward the window. We should probably sleep. Probably. Neither of us moved. He laughed. We're really bad at this. Apparently. But just before we turned out the lights, Arman stopped. He looked at me. Orlando? Yeah? I need you to know something. What? His voice was quiet. The reason I was so scared to tell you wasn't just because I thought I'd lose you. I waited. He looked directly at me. I was scared because I knew that if you said you felt the same way, I wouldn't be able to go back to being just your best friend. I felt my heart pound, and this time I understood exactly what he meant. Neither of us wanted to go back. Not anymore. The next morning felt different. Not dramatically different. There wasn't some huge moment where everything suddenly became clear. It was actually stranger than that. Arman was still Arman. He still stole the last piece of toast. He still complained about the coffee. He still made fun of my hair. But now every little thing felt like it had a second meaning. When our hands brushed, reaching for the same coffee cup, we both noticed. When he smiled at me from across the table, I noticed. When he looked away too quickly, I noticed that too. We checked out around 10. The plan was to spend the afternoon hiking before driving home the following morning. Are you sure you don't want to stay another night? I asked as we loaded the car. Arman closed the trunk. I'd love to. Then why don't we? He smiled. Because if we stay another night, I'll have to admit I planned this entire trip just to get you alone. I laughed. Didn't you? He paused. Maybe. You're terrible at hiding things. Apparently. We drove to a trailhead about 20 minutes outside town. The hike wasn't difficult, but it was long enough that we eventually stopped talking. The forest around us was incredibly quiet. Every once in a while, sunlight broke through the trees and landed across the trail. It felt peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Eventually, we reached a viewpoint overlooking the valley. Arman dropped his backpack and sat on a large rock. Okay, he said. This was worth it. I sat beside him. For a while, we just looked out at the landscape. Then he said, I used to come here alone. Here? Yeah. How many times? 3. When? He shrugged. Whenever things got too complicated. I looked at him. And you came here when you were thinking about me? He nodded. Yeah. Why here? Because nobody knows me here. I understood. Sometimes you needed to be somewhere that didn't have memories attached to you. Somewhere you could think without feeling watched. What did you think about? He smiled. You. Obviously. No, seriously. He looked down at his hands. I thought about what my life would look like if I stopped pretending. I didn't say anything. I imagined calling you and telling you everything. Why didn't you? Because every time I pictured it, I also pictured you saying you didn't feel the same. I looked at him. And now? Now I know I was wrong. He smiled. I smiled back. Then he reached for my hand. It was such a simple gesture. But because it was Arman, it felt enormous. His fingers slipped between mine. I looked down. Neither of us said anything. We just sat there holding hands. For once, there was no confusion, no pretending, no guessing. After a few minutes, I said, You know what's weird? What? I've imagined this too. His eyebrows lifted. You have? Yeah. How long? I laughed. Long enough. He shook his head. Why didn't you tell me? Same reason you didn't. He nodded. Fair. We stayed at the viewpoint until the sun began dropping. On the way back down, we talked about what would happen when we got home. That was where things became complicated. We lived in the same city, had the same friends, knew the same people. Our friendship wasn't private. Whatever happened between us wouldn't stay between us forever. Do you want people to know? I asked. Arman thought about it. Eventually. Not immediately. Not immediately. I nodded. I think I'd rather have some time to figure us out first. Me too. We reached the car just before sunset. Arman opened the passenger door for me. I gave him a look. What? Since when are you polite? I'm trying to impress you. You're doing a terrible job. He laughed. The drive back to the hotel was quiet, not awkward, comfortable. We stopped at a roadside restaurant for dinner. Halfway through the meal, Arman's phone started vibrating. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah. He turned the phone over. Who was it? My sister. She knows you're here? Yeah. Did you tell her about me? He hesitated. A little. What does that mean? He smiled. It means she knows there's someone. Someone? Yeah. Does she know it's me? He laughed. She suspects. How? Because apparently I'm terrible at talking about anyone else. I felt my face get warm. You're kidding. No. He picked up his phone. Another message appeared. He read it and laughed. What? She wants to know if I finally told you. My heart jumped. What did you say? I haven't answered. Why? Because I wanted to ask you first. Ask me what? He looked at me. Are you okay with me telling her? I thought about it. Then I nodded. Yeah. He typed something. A few seconds later, his phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen and burst out laughing. What? She said, finally. I laughed. She knew? Apparently. How long? About a year. I stared at him. Your sister knew you liked me for a year? Yeah. And I didn't? You were oblivious. Apparently. We finished dinner and drove back to the hotel. The following morning, we'd be heading home. That thought made me unexpectedly nervous. The road trip had created a little world for us. No friends, no work, no expectations, Just the two of us. Home would be different. Real life would return. And with it, all the questions we'd been avoiding. That night we sat outside the hotel near a small fire pit. The air was cold. Arman handed me a blanket. "You're freezing." "I'm fine." "You're literally shaking." "I've survived worse." He laughed and wrapped the blanket around my shoulders. Then he sat beside me. Our shoulders touched. "Orlando." "Yeah?" "Are you scared?" I thought about lying. Instead, I said, "A little." "Me too." "What happens if this doesn't work?" He looked at me. "Then we deal with it." "That's it?" "That's it." "You wouldn't regret telling me?" "No." "Even if we couldn't go back?" He shook his head. "I don't want to go back." I smiled. "Me neither." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I think I've spent too much time worrying about losing things." "What do you mean?" "You're my best friend." I was so scared that wanting more would destroy what we already had. He paused. But maybe what we had was always supposed to become something more. I looked at him. Maybe. We sat there until the fire burned low. Then Arman stood. "Come on." "Where?" "I want to show you something." He led me around the side of the hotel to a small overlook. The town lights were visible in the distance. We stood there quietly. Then he turned toward me. "I brought you here because I wanted to tell you the truth." "I know. But there's one more thing." I smiled. "Another confession?" "Kind of." He reached into his jacket pocket. For a second, my mind went completely blank. Then he pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "What is that?" He handed it to me. I opened it. It was a handwritten list. Dates, places, little memories. Our first road trip. The first concert we'd gone to together. The night we'd stayed up until sunrise talking. The day I got my first job. The time I'd called him after my breakup. I looked at him. "You wrote all this?" "Yeah." "Why?" He smiled. "Because these are the moments when I realized how important you were to me." I looked back at the paper. There were dozens of entries. Some I'd completely forgotten. Arman hadn't. At the bottom, there was one final line. I read it twice. The day I finally told Orlando the truth. I looked up. "You already wrote this?" "Yeah." "When?" "Before we left?" I smiled. "You were pretty confident." "No." He laughed. I was terrified. I folded the paper carefully. Then I looked at him. "Thank you." He nodded. And for the first time since we'd arrived, neither of us seemed afraid of what came next. We had one more night, one more drive, and then we'd have to find out what happened when the road trip ended and real life began. The next morning, neither of us wanted to leave. That was the first thing I noticed. We had packed everything before breakfast, but our bags sat by the door while we stood around drinking coffee like we had nowhere else to be. Eventually, Arman looked at his watch. "We should go." "Yeah." Neither of us moved. He laughed. "We're doing it again." "What?" "Putting off going home." I smiled. "I guess neither of us wants the trip to end." He looked at me. "Maybe it's not the trip I'm worried about ending." That stayed in my head as we checked out. The drive home started quietly. For the first hour, we listened to music. Then Arman reached over and turned the volume down. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you regretting it?" I knew exactly what he meant. "No." He looked relieved. "Good." "You?" "Not for a second." I smiled. "Then we're okay." He nodded. But after another few minutes, he said, "There's something we need to talk about." "Of course there is." He laughed. "I'm serious." "So am I." He gripped the steering wheel. "When we get home, I don't want us to pretend nothing happened." "We won't." I mean it. I know. I want to see you. You already see me all the time. Not like that. I smiled. Then what do you want? He glanced at me. An actual date. I laughed. You've said that. I know. And you've still never planned one. That's because this whole trip was supposed to be the date? I stared at him. Seriously? Kind of. You dragged me 4 hours into the mountains and called it a road trip. Romantic, right? Extremely suspicious. He laughed. Then he became quiet. I just wanted somewhere we could talk. I know. And somewhere you couldn't immediately run away. I looked at him. I wouldn't have. I know that now. The rest of the drive passed quickly. When we finally reached the city, I felt strangely disappointed. Everything looked familiar. The same traffic, the same buildings, the same noise. It was as if the world had been waiting for us to come back. Arman dropped me outside my apartment first. He put the car in park, but didn't unlock the doors. I looked at him. What? He smiled. Nothing. You're staring. I know. I laughed. Then he finally unlocked the doors. I reached for the handle. Orlando? I looked back. Yeah? He hesitated. Thanks for saying yes. I smiled. To the road trip? To me? That hit me harder than I expected. I leaned back into the seat. I've been saying yes to you for 8 years? He smiled. Yeah. Just took us a while to figure out what we were saying yes to. He laughed. Go upstairs. Why? Because I'm taking you out tonight. Tonight? Tonight? I shook my head. You really don't waste time. I wasted enough. That made me smile. I got out. As I walked toward my building, I could feel him watching me. I turned around. He was still there. He lifted his hand. I waved. Then he drove away. I barely made it through my apartment door before my phone buzzed. Arman, don't make other plans. I laughed. Me. Wasn't planning to. His response came immediately. Arman. Good. For the next few hours, I had no idea what to do with myself. I showered, changed clothes, changed again, then changed back. I was acting like a teenager getting ready for his first date. Except this wasn't some random guy. This was Arman, my best friend. The guy I'd secretly liked for years. The guy who had just confessed that he'd been feeling the same way. At 7, my phone buzzed. Arman. Outside. I looked out the window. He was standing beside his car. I went downstairs. He looked at me and smiled. You look good. So do you. He opened the passenger door. Where are we going? It's a surprise. You really like surprises. Apparently. He drove us to a small restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy. Just quiet, warm, and crowded enough that we didn't feel like everyone was watching us. Dinner was surprisingly normal. We talked, we laughed, we argued over dessert. At one point, Arman looked across the table and said, This feels weird. Bad weird? No. He smiled. Good weird. I knew exactly what he meant. We'd spent years being best friends. Now we were sitting across from each other on a date. It was familiar and completely new at the same time. After dinner, we walked through downtown. The streets were busy. People passed around us. Cars moved through intersections. Everything was normal. But when Arman reached for my hand, I didn't hesitate. He took it. We walked like that for several blocks. No hiding. No pretending. Just us. Eventually, we stopped outside a bookstore. Arman looked at me. I need to tell you something. I laughed. You're becoming addicted to confessions. He smiled. Probably. What now? I've been thinking about what happens next. And? He squeezed my hand. I don't want this to be temporary. I looked at him. Neither do I. I'm serious. So am I. I want to take things slowly. I nodded. Good. I don't want us rushing into something just because we spent a weekend together. Agreed. But I also don't want to keep calling you my best friend when what I really want is more than that. I smiled. Then don't. He looked almost relieved. Okay. We stood there for a moment. Then he laughed. What? I spent months preparing myself for you to reject me. And now? Now I'm standing here wondering if this is actually happening. I smiled. It is. He nodded. Then his phone buzzed. He checked it. His sister again. I laughed. What does she want? He showed me the screen. So, are you two together yet? I laughed so hard I had to look away. She has no subtlety. None. What are you going to tell her? He typed something. I watched him. Then he turned the screen toward me. We're figuring it out. I smiled. That's fair. He slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then he looked at me. Can I ask you one more thing? Go ahead. Would you come on another road trip with me? I laughed. Absolutely. Even knowing how this one ended? I squeezed his hand. Especially knowing how this one ended. He smiled. And as we continued walking down the street, I realized something. The road trip hadn't changed our friendship. It had just forced us to stop pretending we didn't already want something more. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't wondering what might happen between us. I was wondering where we'd go next. The first few weeks after the road trip were probably the strangest weeks of our friendship. Not because anything bad happened. Actually, the opposite. Everything was going well. Almost too well. Arman and I started going on actual dates. Nothing extravagant. Dinner after work. Coffee on Sunday mornings. Long walks when neither of us wanted to go home yet. The funny thing was that we didn't really have to learn how to be around each other. We already knew. We knew each other's habits, moods, stupid jokes, favorite foods, and worst days. The only thing that had changed was that now we were allowed to admit what had always been underneath all of it. Still, there were moments when one of us would suddenly become quiet, usually because we were both thinking the same thing. How did we miss this for so long? One Friday evening, Arman came over to my apartment. We ordered pizza and watched a movie we'd both already seen. Halfway through, he paused it. Can I ask you something? I laughed. Again? Yes. You really need to find a new opening line. He smiled. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you told me years ago? I thought about it. All the time. Me too. What do you think? He leaned back against the couch. I think I would have been terrified. Same. I probably would have avoided you for a week. I laughed. Only a week? Okay, 2. Then? I would have realized I was an idiot. I smiled. Probably. He looked at me. But maybe we needed those years. Why? Because we became best friends first. He said it like it mattered. And it did. We weren't strangers who happened to find each other attractive. We knew each other. Really knew each other. That made what we were building feel different. More solid. Then one evening, about a month after the road trip, something happened that reminded me how complicated things could become. We were at a friend's birthday party. There were about 15 people there. Most of them knew us as best friends. Nobody knew about us yet. We hadn't made any announcement. We weren't hiding exactly. We just weren't ready to explain it. At one point, I was standing in the kitchen talking to one of our friends when a guy I'd never met walked over. He was friendly, confident, and clearly interested in me. So, he said, smiling, "Are you single?" Before I could answer, I heard Arman's voice behind me. No. The guy looked confused. I turned around. Arman looked equally surprised by what he'd just said. I mean, he paused. I raised an eyebrow. He recovered quickly. He's not available. The guy laughed. Got it. He walked away. I stared at Arman. What was that? He rubbed his forehead. I don't know. You just told a stranger I'm not single. You aren't. That's not the point. He smiled. I know. I couldn't help laughing. You were jealous. I was not. You absolutely were. I was protecting my best friend. Sure. He rolled his eyes. Then his expression became serious. Okay. What? I was jealous. I smiled. Why didn't you just say that? Because I didn't want to sound possessive. You don't. He looked at me. Good. Then he reached for my hand. Right there, in the kitchen, where anyone could see. I looked around. Arman. What? People. I know. Are you okay with that? He nodded. I think I'm done being scared. That sentence stayed with me. Later that night when we were driving home, I asked him about it. Are you really done being scared? He thought for a while. No. I smiled. I knew it. I'm still scared. Of what? Of losing you. I looked at him. But you're not letting fear make decisions anymore. He smiled. Exactly. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then he said, There's another reason I was scared. What? I didn't know if I could be the person you needed. I frowned. You already are. He shook his head. That's not what I mean. He pulled up outside my apartment. I've always been good at being your best friend. He looked at me. But being your boyfriend? He laughed nervously. I don't want to screw it up. I reached across the center console and squeezed his hand. You don't have to be perfect. I know. You just have to be honest. He nodded. I can do that. Then he smiled. Most of the time. I laughed. We sat there for another minute. Then he said, Actually, there's something I've been planning. What? Another trip. I stared at him. You really can't stay away from road trips. This one's different? How? I want to take you somewhere I've never taken anyone. That immediately caught my attention. Where? You'll see. I narrowed my eyes. That's what you said last time. And look how well that turned out. I laughed. Fair. He leaned over and kissed my forehead. It was quick, simple, but it made me smile. Then he drove away. I watched his car disappear down the street. At the time, I thought the next trip would just be another weekend together. I had no idea that Arman had been planning something much bigger, and I definitely didn't know that the second road trip would force us to answer the one question we'd both been avoiding since that first night at the hotel. What exactly were we? Because saying, "We're figuring it out," was easy. Actually deciding what came next was something else entirely. A week later, Arman showed up at my apartment with the same look he'd had the first time he'd invited me on a road trip. That look immediately made me suspicious. I opened the door. What's that face? What face? The face you make when you've planned something and don't want to tell me. He smiled. Pack a bag. I laughed. Seriously? Seriously. Where? Somewhere. You're impossible. I know. I grabbed my jacket. How long? 2 days. Hotel? Yeah. I stopped. Same hotel? He shook his head. Different place. For some reason that made me relax. We got into the car. This time, I didn't ask where we were going. I just trusted him. The drive felt different from the first one. There wasn't that nervous silence between us anymore. We talked about everything. Work, family, our friends, the future. At one point, Arman reached over and rested his hand on the center console between us. I placed mine over it. He smiled. You know, he said, I used to imagine doing this. Driving? No, this. He looked down at our hands. Being able to touch you without pretending it was accidental? I smiled. You could have just held my hand. 8 years ago? Maybe. You would have freaked out. I would have pretended not to. Exactly. We laughed. By late afternoon, we reached the destination. It was a small town beside a lake. There were hiking trails, cabins, and a quiet little main street. Arman parked outside a small lodge. I looked at him. Okay? What? What's the plan? He took a breath. I want to show you something. We checked in. This time, we had one room. I noticed immediately. But unlike the first trip, neither of us felt awkward about it. There were 2 beds again. Arman dropped his bag onto one. I booked this place months ago. Months? Yeah. Why? He looked at me. Because I knew I'd eventually want to bring you here. I smiled. We spent the afternoon walking around the lake. Then Arman took me to a small dock at the edge of the property. He sat down. I joined him. For a while, we watched the water. Then he said, Do you remember what you said when I first told you I loved you? I said a lot of things. You said you didn't know what we were. I nodded. I still think about that. So do I. He looked at me. I think I know now. I waited. I don't want you to be my almost. I stared at him. What? I don't want us to be something we're afraid to name. He took a breath. I want you to be my boyfriend. My heart jumped. It was such a simple sentence, but somehow it meant more than everything we'd said before. I smiled. Okay. He laughed nervously. Okay? Yes. That's it? What did you expect? I don't know. A speech. I laughed. I've already given you one. He smiled. Then he reached into his jacket. I immediately groaned. Please don't tell me you wrote another list. He laughed. No. He pulled out a small envelope. This is for you. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was old. Really old. A picture of us from our first year of college. We were standing outside a cheap pizza place, both of us looking ridiculous. I stared at it. You kept this? Of course. Why? Because that's where it started. I looked at the picture again. Back then, I had no idea how important that guy standing beside me would become. I hadn't known he'd eventually become the person I called when something went wrong. The person I trusted with everything. The person I secretly loved. And now he was sitting beside me, asking me to stop calling him just my best friend. I looked at him. I want that. What? Us. He smiled. Good. Then he leaned closer. This time, there was no hesitation, no confusion, no question. The kiss was brief and gentle, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When we pulled apart, we both laughed. That was anticlimactic, I said. He stared at me. Seriously? I'm joking. You better be. I laughed. Then he shook his head. Come on. Where? Dinner. You planned dinner too? Of course. Who are you? He smiled. Your boyfriend. I laughed. That still sounds weird. Give it time. That evening, we had dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the lake. We talked for hours about the past, about the future, about what we wanted. And somewhere between dessert and coffee, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. Not about losing him. Not about what people would think. Not about whether this was going to work. I knew there would be difficult days. We were still the same 2 imperfect people we'd always been. But now, we were choosing each other honestly. When we returned to the hotel, Arman stopped outside the door. He looked at me. You know what the best part of this trip is? What? I don't have anything left to hide. I smiled. Neither do I. He opened the door. We went inside. And for the first time since that original road trip, I thought about how terrified we'd both been. How close we'd come to never saying anything. How different our lives might have been if Arman had decided to keep his secret. I looked at him. What would have happened if you never told me? He thought about it. I don't know. Would we still be friends? Probably. But would you be happy? He shook his head. No. I walked over and hugged him. He held me tightly. And standing there, I finally understood why he'd driven me all those miles in the first place. He hadn't needed a hotel. He hadn't needed a road trip. He just needed enough courage to finally tell me the truth. And somehow, that truth had given both of us something we'd been missing for years. A chance. A real one. The next morning, we packed our bags. This time, neither of us was sad to leave, because we knew the trip wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. As we drove home, Arman looked at me and smiled. So, boyfriend? I laughed. Yeah? Where should we go next? I looked out at the road ahead, then back at him. Anywhere. And I meant it. I thought the second road trip would be the end of the story. Honestly, I wanted it to be. Not because I wanted things to stop with Arman, but because for the first time, I felt like we'd finally reached the place we'd been trying to get to. We were together. We had said it out loud. We weren't hiding from each other anymore. But life doesn't really work that neatly. About 2 months after that trip, things got complicated. Not between us. Everywhere else. My job started falling apart. The company I worked for was cutting staff, and one afternoon, I was called into a meeting and told my position was being eliminated. I walked out of the building carrying a box of things from my desk. I remember sitting on a bench outside for almost 20 minutes. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call any of my friends. I called Arman. He answered on the second ring. Hey. I couldn't speak. He immediately knew something was wrong. Orlando? They let me go. There was a pause. Then he said, Where are you? I told him, Stay there. Arman, you don't have to. I'm coming. 25 minutes later, he pulled up. He got out, walked over, and hugged me without saying anything. I stood there holding him. And suddenly, all the fear I'd been carrying came out. I didn't care that people were walking past. I didn't care that someone might see us. I just stood there with my face against his shoulder. He held me tighter. You'll figure it out, he said. What if I don't? Then we'll figure it out. That's not how this works. It is now. I laughed through my tears. You're impossible. I know. We went back to my apartment. That night, we sat at my kitchen table and made a plan. Applications, bills, expenses, everything. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't some perfect movie moment. It was better. It was real. And that's when I realized something about us. The road trip hadn't magically turned us into perfect partners. It had just given us the chance to become the kind of couple we'd always been capable of being. We supported each other. We argued. We apologized. We learned. And sometimes we still acted like idiots. A few months later, I found another job. It wasn't my dream job, but it was good. Arman celebrated like I'd won some huge award. He showed up with takeout and a ridiculous little cake that said, Orlando survived. I laughed so hard I almost dropped it. Where did you even find this? Custom order. You are such a loser. You're a loser. I smiled. Yeah. Eventually, we told our closest friends. Most of them weren't surprised. One friend actually looked at us and said, Finally. Apparently, everyone had noticed something except us. Or maybe we had noticed and just refused to admit it. Either way, things settled into something comfortable. Months passed. Then came the anniversary of that first road trip. I didn't even realize the date until Arman showed up outside my apartment with his car. I opened the door. He held out a coffee. "Get your jacket." I laughed. "Where are we going?" "You know." I stared at him. "No." He smiled. "Yes." I looked at the car, then at him. "You aren't serious." "Completely." "You're taking me back to the hotel?" "Maybe." I grabbed my jacket. "Give me 5 minutes." The drive felt strangely familiar. Same road, same trees, same mountain views. But everything was different. We were different. When we finally reached the hotel, I recognized the building immediately. I looked at Arman. "You actually booked it." "Of course." He smiled. We checked in. The woman at the front desk looked at us and said, "Welcome back." I laughed. "She remembers you?" Arman shrugged. "I made an impression?" We went upstairs, room 214, the same room. I opened the door. Everything looked almost exactly as I remembered. The same window, the same 2 beds, the same view. I stood there for a moment. Arman came up beside me. "Remember?" "How could I forget?" He smiled. "This is where I thought I'd lose you." I looked at him. "And this is where I found you." He smiled. We stood there quietly. Then he reached into his pocket. I immediately laughed. "Please tell me that's not another list." He shook his head. "No." He handed me a small piece of paper. I unfolded it. There was only one sentence. "I would choose you again." I looked at him. "You wrote this?" "Yeah." "When?" "Today." I smiled. "I'd choose you too." He nodded. Then he reached for my hand. We stood there together. 8 years of friendship. 1 terrifying confession. 2 road trips. 1 hotel room. And a relationship neither of us had been brave enough to imagine properly. I thought about that first night. How scared he'd been. How scared I'd been. How easily we could have walked away from it. How different everything would have been. Then I realized something. People always talk about finding love like it's some sudden event. Like one day someone appears and everything changes. But sometimes love is already there. It grows quietly. Inside friendship. Inside trust. Inside all the ordinary moments you don't think will matter later. Sometimes you just need the courage to finally recognize it. Arman squeezed my hand. "You thinking too hard again?" I laughed. "Probably." "About what?" "You." He smiled. "Good answer." We walked over to the window. Outside, the mountains looked exactly the same as they had the first time. But I wasn't the same person who had stood there a year earlier, wondering what Arman was hiding. Now I knew. And more importantly, he knew. There was nothing left to guess. Nothing left to hide. I looked at him. "So, where are we going next?" He smiled. "Anywhere you want." I thought about it. Then I laughed. "Just promise me something." "What?" "Next time, tell me we're going on a road trip." He laughed. "I promise." "And don't surprise me with a hotel confession." "No guarantees." I shook my head. "You're impossible." He leaned against me. "Yeah." I smiled. "But you're still here. Always." And that was the truth. I used to think the best thing that ever happened to me was meeting my best friend. I was wrong. The best thing was finally realizing that I'd been standing next to the person I loved for years. I just needed Arman to take me far enough away from home to finally say it. And somehow, that ridiculous road trip changed everything.